Howdy everyone, Elias, Leonidas here, and we are starting off a new series. This new series is Podcast by the Fire. This series and format will be simplistic podcast videos that include mostly only audio. Maybe it includes a little bit of visuals. I maybe will include a little bit of visuals on them for the YouTube for people on YouTube that like to watch the videos. They're mostly just meant for audio recordings, so you can listen and go about your day while listening to a podcast. The reason why I wanted to do a podcast type series on this channel is I just found it very interesting. I really like talking and really like expressing my opinions on certain matters, and I felt like that could be a very useful and very great format to kind of a quick and somewhat easy series for me. These videos will be minimalistically edited, so I apologize if they're not always perfect, but the idea is for me to get something out there for you guys at least weekly. And if I'm able to, and if I have a lot to talk about or a lot to discuss, we'll do the series even more frequently than that. So Podcast by the Fire, just to move some stuff out of the way, is obviously modeled off the FDR fireside chats. Podcast by the Fire is just going to be us having different discussions. And while I definitely want to center around gaming, especially at first, Podcast by the Fire can be a whole variety of different things, and hopefully we'll talk about a whole variety of different topics. I have no exact length of these videos. It will kind of be however long I end up talking, given a certain topic or topics we might be discussing that week, and seeing how we can develop and formulate this series from there. For our first Podcast by the Fire, we're going to look into video game reviews. And I'm hoping this first podcast will tie in with the launching of another series that we're going to have on the channel, which is the launching of our own review system here on the channel. That review system is called the Pantheon of Games. State my issues with modern game reviews. I think we need to break them down into two categories of reviews, and we'll address both of them and the problems that both of them have, in my opinion at least. The first category of game review that I have a problem with is large game company / large platform game review. You can think of these entities as IGN, Game Informer, Kotaku, and other game review type companies or game news companies. One of the issues I often have with these companies is their inconsistency in reviews and their inconsistency in the system that they use themselves. Because at one time they could criticize a game and give it a 7. At another time, they could praise a game that is very conceivably and honestly, in my opinion, or from my perspective, very easily much worse a game, and it still receives a 7 as well. And this inconsistency, at least within large game companies and game platforms and game news sites, is pretty easy to see where the problem arises. As the stereotypical saying goes, there is too many cooks in the kitchen. There are too many writers writing a variety of different articles about a variety of different games. It's one thing that these big platforms are great at. They give us variety and they help a lot of different games get exposure and get reviewed. But unfortunately, that leaves a lot of the time where a game from a series, different games in a series, or games in a certain genre are not reviewed by the same writer. They're not reviewed by the same group, or they're not reviewed consistently. This issue arises for me when you have games from a series that are considered better get worse reviews, get worse scores, or get left out. Now, as I've already stated, this arises because different writers are writing different things. And it becomes a consistent problem. I guess the biggest thing for me, and it's often the pinnacle of when a lot of people think of inconsistent reviews from big companies. This was a inconsistent review from IGN. This specific set of inconsistent reviews this inconsistent set of reviews revolves around IGN's review of Pokemon's Alpha. Revolves around IGN's review of Pokemon Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby. These games were remakes of the original Pokemon Sapphire and Ruby. And in my opinion, these were unbelievably amazing remakes. They're what remakes often should be. They changed so much and they made the game better in a lot of ways and added so many awesome new features. But in the IGN review, the IGN reviewer talked relatively positive. The IGN reviewer had a lot to say and was actually rather glowing about a lot of aspects of the game. Their review was rather positive and rather upbeat and pretty awesome. So that leads to the end of the video. The end of this IGN review, the IGN reviewer adds on a couple negatives, which is totally acceptable. The game wasn't perfect and there's things to talk about. But then at the end of the IGN video, and I'm sure many of you know this because this is very old by now, but the IGN reviewer, after talking relatively positively about the game, ultimately gives it a score around 7. I apologize, I don't have it right on hand. It's a 7 something. And ultimately the writer justifies this 7 or around 7 score with having a lot of things in the good column, and I believe it was 1 or 2 things in the bad column. And the one bad thing was that there was too much water in a game, in a setting that was set around islands and a part of the Pokemon world that was literally supposed to be islands and a bunch of water. Which, if you had played the original Sapphire and Ruby, was the same amount of water that had existed in the previous games, basically. And this review, at the time even, but even still today, baffles me, because how could a fan of the Pokemon series that had played the game, that had reviewed it, really justifiably believe that? And I apologize. I found the score, and this is one thing I like to do on the podcast. I will try to look up things as I talk about them to kind of adjust. It was a 7.8. The game received a 7.8, which is not quite as low as a 7, but the positives were gorgeous details, a plethora of post-game content, and some smart updates, which I would agree with. I would say it's actually not good enough. I think there was a lot more better and creative changes, and I think it was really a amazing remake. And if they want to remake Pokemon games like that every so often, I would be okay with games that are that good of quality and add that much to it. And it'd be one thing if the IGN writer writes a critical point of why their rating was so low or why it dragged it down so much. But when you look at the other side of it, the negatives for this IGN review were too much water and too many HM moves. While there is too many HM moves in the sense that HM moves are kind of dumb, to the point that modern Pokemon games have kind of phased them out completely. They're too much water, and too much water review that the meme and joke it has become to us in the modern days. A pinnacle of a problem within larger game companies' reviews. I'm not saying that I know the reviewer, and I'm not trying to pile hate onto the reviewer that did this. It just doesn't feel like the reviewer really played the original Pokemon. At least the original Pokemon Alpha and Ruby. Or at least they had completely forgot that experience by the time that they picked it up and played it again. And actually, and this is the other thing I like about this podcast, I'm going to correct myself, and this person says that they did play Pokemon again, that they did play Pokemon when it came out in 2002. So this person is well aware and has experience with the Pokemon franchise. And that's fine, and she can have a different opinion, and maybe she felt that the update didn't justify the cost, or maybe it wasn't exactly perfect. But the problem I have with this ultimately is this received a 7.8. I wonder what other Pokemon games have received. And I'm ultimately assured that other Pokemon games were not reviewed by the same reviewer. Looking back, and to give context to this all, and occasionally I'm going to try to cut out some of these pauses, but like I said, I want this format to be a rather quick and simple podcast for me to put up, so occasionally I apologize if there's pauses or breaks, or there's some sounds that are a little bit distracting or annoying. But I wanted to look up real quick. Pokemon Go received a 7 out of 10. A 7 out of 10, I could see Pokemon Go was a fun, justifiable game, but I can't agree with the fact that Pokemon Go receives a 7 out of 10, but Pokemon Alpha, Sapphire, and Omega Ruby receive a 7.8. It just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel close. And I get that they're different games, they do different things, but it's just a very great inconsistency for me. Now, this Pokemon Go review is actually made by the same person, which is surprising because very often a lot of these reviews aren't. And that's understandable at a larger game company because, well, people recycle in and out of companies like this. And people aren't always there to make reviews for every game. That being said, it just creates a lot of doubt when there's such an inconsistency in the writing and just an inconsistency in how it's explained. For example, Pokemon White version 2, its review is made by a different person. She gives it a 9.6. Now, Pokemon White version 2, I do not have a ton of experience playing. It wasn't necessarily my favorite game in the Pokemon series, and I don't necessarily agree with the 9.6, but I can't fault the review and what she gave it. Because one, I haven't completed the game like I did Alpha, Sapphire, and Omega Ruby. But it seems like, especially given its high ratings, it has justifiable reasons for it. I guess what I'm getting at with this irked nature I have with larger game companies is this inconsistency just makes it hard to follow and view / respect how these games to respect how these companies review games. Because I'll be honest, I don't really trust IGN's review of any game. And that's partially because IGN doesn't always align with what I view. And that doesn't mean IGN should always rate games exactly how I view them. That's not what I'm getting at all. Instead, what I think is much, much more important is IGN should have reviews and a consistency with its reviewers. a perfect example of this. And again, it comes with the fact that these are large companies that interchange people. Pokemon Pearl was reviewed by a different person. So there isn't a consistent reviewer constantly discussing these Pokemon games. And instead of maybe having one reviewer, these larger companies could have a pool or a group that reviews games. And I feel like those would maybe be a little bit better. They'd be more challenging for them, definitely, right? But I feel like it would get a more consistent and realistic review and picture. Because having somebody that either knows or doesn't know a certain game or series could drastically affect the score. And one other thing I want to look up while we're here discussing is I want to look up the original Pokemon Ruby and Pokemon Sapphire. I want to see what their scores and their ratings were. I'm fairly certain that they won't be the same person, but we'll see. So Pokemon Ruby's original review score was a 9.5. I have played both Pokemon Sapphire and both Pokemon Ruby, and I played the updated version of Pokemon Alpha Sapphire. Pokemon Omega Ruby, Pokemon Ruby and Pokemon Sapphire are both amazing games, and on IGN they receive a 9.5, or at least the Ruby version does. And that's justifiable to me. That's exactly what I would agree with. It was a great game, a great Pokemon game, and rather enjoyable. I'm not saying that exact score is exactly what I would have put, but I agree with the general score. It's definitely a great game with deservingly great score. But then the remake versions of it, remakes that I honestly, they're better. To me, not just the visuals, but the added features and the looks and everything are just better. And I'm not saying that a remake automatically, because it's better than the original, deserves a better score, because they're just remaking features, and sometimes those features that debuted in a title deserve to be praised. What I am saying, though, is Pokemon Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby were definitely better than the previous game and didn't score anywhere near close. And that partially has to do with the inconsistency of reviews. And what that does, this inconsistency of reviews, is sometimes really throw out wacky scores that may turn off people from great games like Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby. If you're a fan of Pokemon, you should definitely get those games. That 7.8 isn't justified, and it would be one thing if it was written in the article that it was, or if that throughout the entirety of IGN, the same person or at least a collective group of people had been writing these articles. But instead, it's just a changing, revolving door of people that write different articles about the same game, about the same series, different games, but it creates a very inconsistent pattern with what these games receive and what their scores are. One of the major issues I also had with a lot of these large gaming companies that do large game reviews is a very, very, very inconsistent idea of rating certain franchises. I'm not accusing or saying that certain games or companies go out of their way to partner with or give reviews that are more favorable to certain companies. It just feels like it more often than not. And it's one thing when somebody articulates in a well-written article that, you know, this is the way this game is and this is what I believe the score is. It's not the problem that I think that game is an 8 and you said it was a 6. The problem I have is you said it was a 6 but didn't say anything otherwise. And then a review that you're not writing, which is true, somebody else in the same company you work for is writing, but comes out about an even crappier game and you give it an 8 when you just gave a much better game a 6. I just don't understand it. Is I guess my biggest problem and one of my biggest critiques with the larger game companies. And it's one of those critiques where it's understandable. It's understandable in the sense that the same person never works on it, because the same people don't always stay at these larger corporations and larger gaming companies. They get turned out, they find better jobs or alternative jobs, and they move on. And it creates a lack of consensus and consistency within the reviews for these larger companies. So what would be my solution for these larger corporations' consistencies? As I said a little bit before, maybe creating panels or groups more often than not that review games, and kind of highlighting who is on that panel or group. So maybe instead of just one writer writing a review for your Pokemon Alpha Sapphire game, which everyone's going to see, maybe have a collection of those writers write that together and decide what that rating or review should be. Because ultimately, especially in that case, and this is, again, just a case study for a lot of other problems that exist throughout the gaming industry in these larger review companies, is it's not an issue that the reviewer gave the 7.8. It's the issue that the reviewer gave it a 7.8, talked about how amazing it was, and then in the little I'm not sure what you call it, but little advertisement of what they eventually rate the game at the bottom of their page, at least for IGN, the positives are glowing and the negatives are not really that big of deals, and they're not explained well, and one of them is about too much water, which existed in the first game. So if you're going to fault the remake, you might as well have faulted the original as well. And again, that goes back to not bashing that writer, because that writer didn't write the original score that Ruby and Sapphire received. And as I was saying, and sometimes we may get off track a little bit, as I was saying, I think the way they could remedy this more often than not, I know I've heard how they try to create consistency in reviews, and I'm not trying to vilify these larger platforms. I'm not trying to vilify IGN. It's just something that I have a bone to pick with, and I've noticed it a lot within larger companies, and people have noticed it for a long time. They could create kind of these review boards, or, require that it's not just one writer writing a thing, writing a review. It's multiple writers. So more than one eye playing a game. So it's more than just one person writing a review, because one person having an opinion on the game is fine, especially in a YouTube setting, because you're writing and stating your own personal opinion. If I write a review about this new game that came out, if I write a review about Fallout 76, which I haven't actually played, and say it's terrible, it's awful, don't play it, why would you play a single-player normal franchise in a multiplayer setting, especially one done so poorly? That would be justifiable, because it's coming out of my mouth, and especially if I've created more than one review, or as I create reviews, you can understand what games I like, what I expect, what I take away from games when they do things wrong, at least in my opinion, and my voice encompasses or encapsulates my channel. You understand that review is from me, and it represents me. Because of this large corporation setting, having only one person write your reviews is problematic, because then you have one person speaking, or at least it's perceived. I'm not saying IGN holistically believes in every review score that they send out, but ultimately it seemingly has one person that's associated or at fault when these reviews come out. And it's all the responsibility of one person when these reviews do come out. Speaking of which, these reviews, I before we kind of wrap up this first section about the big game review companies, and how I just think I just really would like them to take the time and be able to either create a review board, so you have maybe 5 people in a genre or in genre teams. So if a genre is really big, you can have multiple people or multiple teams all review it at once. So that way, that team of 3 or 5 or however many they would like to put on it can make a cohesive score representing a company that's made up of a bunch of different people with a variety of opinions and ideas. And it's not only the reviews that comes through in larger companies. And again, I know a lot of this, I wasn't trying to beat up on these larger companies. It's just how it gets perceived, especially when we compare it to a lot of YouTubers. Unfortunately, you'll have a video where you have a member of IGN or a member of these big organizations that say, you know what, I absolutely hate this franchise and there's never been a good game or a good part of this series. But then you'll have the review that loves it and crows it. And that's understandable because there's multiple individuals at that company. But the problem is when they put out these reviews are ultimately being written by one person and expressing one person's ideas and beliefs, but it comes off as if it's IGN's opinion. IGN has approved or allowed this person to speak for the company as a whole. And then when other facets of the company speak ill or speak bad about that game or about that review or speak in the opposite direction of the review, it really kind of makes you lose credibility, and it makes you, as the viewer, not put your trust in that company. You rather put your trust into somebody that you know and somebody that you kind of know and has created a very consistent voice, very consistent ideas, and, you know, has very, I hate to keep overusing the word, very consistently, methodically stated their opinion, shown you in previous reviews why they believe that, and has continued to express their love, hatred, or indifference to that game continue forward. Or if they change their opinion, they express why it's changed, and they express their own opinion. They're not expressing anyone else's. Just to take a real quick little second, I was trying to look up, there was that review issue, a review scandal with IGN, and I can't remember the name or the game. It was the IGN reviewer that made the Dead Cells review. And while we're not here to talk about that whole thing, because that's another podcast that we could make and another discussion we could have, stuff like that occurs, that type of plagiarism, because there's only one writer writing for a giant organization. If I do something where I plagiarize somebody's voice, opinion, or stance, it's very clearly that I did it, and it represents on me as the individual. Versus at IGN, for example, it doesn't mean the entirety of IGN is a bad company or an evil organization. They're just a large company, and in video games, that's not usually a good thing. We tend to be distrustful of kind of larger entities within video gaming, and I understand why. But the Dead Cells plagiarism or review copy or whatever you want to call it is the perfect example of this, because this is one guy doing it, whether he intentionally did it or not. Again, we can save that for another time. Ultimately, having a review system of 3 or 5 people all playing that game and all doing it at the same time, one would prevent any of this from happening in the first place, because writing the article together, they would create their own words and they would utilize their own stuff. 2, I would hope, especially if a lot of people at IGN, I'm sure, really do want to be real, authentic journalists. I'm not assuming, and I don't think at all that the majority or even a large portion of IGN's writers or reporters aren't serious journalists or aren't trying to be serious game journalists. It's just, at least with a system of 3 or 5 writers writing a single review, you could at least catch an individual if they're intentionally trying to copy another review or steal another review, and catch what they're doing and stop it or prevent that from happening. And instead of, and for example, if this Dead Cell, his name was Philippe Minuchin, was the IGN person that supposedly had plagiarized the video review. If he was so desperate to plagiarize it and did in fact intentionally do it, he may just not been able to write, and that doesn't give him an excuse. He ultimately stole this content from another creator, from a YouTuber, and that is absolutely ridiculous. But at least with a team of 3 to 5 writers, somebody could have stepped in and had those creative ideas or those opinions that could have helped write that article, versus this guy potentially, if he was very maliciously trying to do it, him intentionally deciding to do that. And again, I don't know the story on that. I'm not casting assumption on him. I'm just casting assumption on this idea of having a single writer write for a large company and having it appear as the company's opinion when it's just a single individual that's writing it. So that should be about it for our part. So that should be about it for this first part, at least in our first category of what I feel is the problem with reviews, at least in the sense of larger corporations and larger entities. There's an individual representing a larger corporation. That's not a great idea. If they wanted to be serious and prevent a lot of these issues, I think that can be solved by having multiple people write reviews. It's more costly to them, it takes more time, but realistically, it would probably do a lot better job for them. Well, the second part of this topic that I want to talk about is my issue with YouTube reviews, or YouTubers that do reviews. This section I don't think will be nearly as long. There's definitely more I have to say about it, but I think the biggest and largest problem I have with a lot of YouTubers that do reviews is often in this YouTube environment, a lot of YouTubers create very rushed, very quick reviews. And this is something large game companies have done as well. But the pressure of an ever-increasing and ever just mind-blowing expansion of both just video games in general and even good video games creates pressure for a lot of YouTubers, especially a lot of YouTubers that have these review systems in place, to constantly pump out new and better and, accurate reviews. But what it does often is it creates this panic or this rush that a YouTuber needs to be the first one out saying those first review topics. If not, you get lost in the sea that is YouTube reviews, because they all tend to drop right at the same time. Everyone reviews a game right when it comes out, and again, that's not a problem. We do need people to look at games and see how good they are, and through word of mouth we discover if games are good or not. But I feel like there's a lot of saturation, especially within YouTube, with YouTubers doing reviews of games when they come out. It's something, at least for now and probably for the foreseeable future, I don't think I'll really get in on. I don't want to spend money right away just to tell you an opinion about a game I probably don't care about. I don't want to spend money to jump on this YouTube review bandwagon, because often this YouTube review bandwagon, like I was saying, requires you be the first one that says something. The first one that makes this point, the first one that reviews or encapsulates it. Oftentimes, to me, that leads to a lot of reviews being somewhat superficial. A lot of people say the same exact things, which is fine because a lot of times people are going to think the same way about certain games. You can only describe something that's beautiful so many times. You can only describe something that's awful so much. You can only complain about loot boxes in so many different ways. My issue isn't necessarily that the YouTubers that do these reviews say similar things. My issue is it feels sometimes like these YouTubers are sprinting through games, that just like some big companies that we saw some pushback and some flack from, some of these YouTubers don't fully play certain games, or they play them enough to write a generalized review, which is ultimately what these reviews are for, but it just leaves me with a hollow feeling as far as a review. Because a review to me, and a review if you watch some other parts of the channel I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I want our review system here on this channel to be kind of a review of the game's legacy, and a review of more than just like that initial response and that initial like snap thought of, well, this game is good, this game is bad, this game's indifferent. Because gaming, video gaming, changes a lot more than a lot of other mediums. You know, occasionally TV shows, you know, this season can be better than the last season, but especially movies, they're very stagnant creatures in themselves. When a movie comes out, that is the movie. If it's a shitty movie, it stays a shitty movie. Whereas games can be changed, can be developed in something greater, whether that's through the developer or whether that's a mod community that's amazing and picks up the shitty game and makes it into something awesome. And that's another part. I'm not trying to excuse shitty game developers or shitty policies. It's more of just trying to look at a game. I don't want to throw a game into the trash heap of history or burn it on the fire when it's an amazing game that deserves to be remembered, even though maybe the people that made it originally don't deserve that credit. It's important to remember the game itself, the full body of the picture it paints. So relating this back to kind of my problem with YouTubers is I just feel a lot of YouTube reviews are sometimes rushed. They're sometimes very generalized. They constantly try to outdo each other, which, you know, has to do with this rat race that is YouTube. And it's understandable. I'm not trying to pick on any YouTubers that do reviews because, you know, that is a legitimate way to get views. And I know that gets a ton of views for certain people. And I know and I agree that I sometimes need certain people to tell me, you know, hey, is this game pretty good? Because I'm on the fence. You know, great games, usually you don't need somebody to tell you twice. I didn't need somebody to tell me that The Witcher 3 was an amazing game that you should buy. But maybe a game that I was on the fence about that I was like, you know, I like it, but I'm not sure if it's that great. People are like, oh, no, you should totally check it out. So again, a lot of, I think, my complaining or a lot of my talk here on this podcast so far has just kind of been my gripes with reviews, both by large game companies and platforms, and my gripes with some YouTube reviews. And this pretty much, this section of YouTube reviews is much smaller because I just don't have as much to talk about it. I just feel sometimes they're rushed, and it partly is because of the format of the platform. It's one of those things where they exist because they kind of have to exist in that manner. Just sometimes makes me disengage and not enjoy them as much. And there's definitely certain YouTubers that I've seen that do this more often than not. And there's definitely other YouTubers that I really enjoy their comments. I really enjoy their review of video games. I personally, and again, you all can have the people that you look for reviews and that you love. I've always watched Angry Joe on and off, and I do enjoy his review of video games. I enjoy his perspective. I don't always agree with it 100%, but I feel like he does care and is very passionate about games and doing those reviews. So I get that feeling that he's put a lot more time and a lot more effort than some other YouTubers I see out there when it comes to, you know, being the first to highlight this review, to talk about these issues, or talk about, you know, why the game is a piece of shit and you shouldn't buy it. So I think that'll wrap it up for the second point I'd like to make when it comes to YouTubers doing video game reviews. Now, I've kind of checking the total time. We're somewhere around like the 40-ish minute mark. I have, like I said, no set time I want to make on these podcasts. I really would like to hear from you guys. Let me know how long you would like them to be. Let me know what topics you guys are really interested in seeing. And of course, just let me know in general. This podcast, I hope, gives you a feeling of almost like a one-on-one conversation, or at least like a small group conversation that we all can share and share kind of our thoughts on different things, on different topics. You know, do you agree that there's some issues with how we do game review, with reviews and gaming in general? Do you like or have disdain for larger corporations and larger platforms of reviewers? Do you prefer them because they give you a general idea? Do you like smaller YouTube channels or YouTubers that give you great different content or different reviews? Or are you sick of seeing certain YouTubers that kind of just sound like parrots and are pumping out the same review you just heard from somebody else that, you know, articulated it and created a much, you know, better video? Let me know down in the comments. Of course, let me know what topics you may like to see next. I'm open to pretty much talking about anything. What I'll try to do is, if there's anything in the gaming news, we'll bring it up. If there's anything that's just on my mind in the gaming news, like how this came about, I just wanted to create like a review system for my channel, and I just thought about and became slightly annoyed / infuriated with a lot of review systems right now and reviewing in general. I'm not saying my system will be the end all to be all or replace anything. I just think having, especially for YouTubers, creating your own system that, you know, you support, and I hope with my system I can talk about it and explain it to you all in an articulate way, or at least make you guys understand good, because I speak well sometimes, would be a, you know, great way for a lot of YouTubers to do it. Because I feel like a lot of times YouTubers break down into, they either follow the number format, or they do like those essay style, you know, here's a 20-30 minute review / breakdown of everything that's ever happened with this game, which isn't bad, though. I enjoy watching those as well. I just sometimes feel like there is certain YouTube channels that have a creative development of how they do reviews or how they do different things. And then there's other channels that it just feels like they're a smaller version of a large corporation, and it's just generic me write article that says smart things about stuff. And again, this is all my opinion. You guys could disagree with it. Well, I've dragged on for a little bit extra. I just wanted to kind of iterate all this to you guys and let you guys all know, and just ramble on for a bit because I felt like talking just a little bit longer. Well, thank you so much for watching our first podcast by the fire. I hope to do this series, like I was saying, at least weekly. We'll see how it goes. We'll see what your guys' interest in it is, and we'll see what you guys want from it. Again, leave topics down in the comments. Let me know what you would like to hear about next. And of course, respond. Please Tell me your opinion, how you felt about the things I talked about. You know, keep it calm, keep it cool down in the comments, but, let's start a conversation. Let's discuss some things, and I will absolutely love to respond to you guys. I'm not going to promise for sure I'll always get to everything, but I will do my absolute best. Well, thank you once again, and, well, I'll talk to you in the next podcast. So ciao for now. Well, thank you so much once again. This has been Elias Leonidas. I'll talk to you in the next podcast, or I'll see you in the next video. Ciao for now.